Hello and welcome back once again to the Single Malt Review. We've got yet another oddity here on the channel today. What have you brought to class?
Well, back in November 2018 was the latest Hororata Highland Games. Hororata being a small town outside Christchurch where we live, and for the last few years I've hosted a 1 day of Highland festivities. There's a strong Scottish influence here in Christchurch. Heck, my own family heritage, I'm a quarter Scottish on my mother's side. And for the occasion, Whisky Galore, our local whisky experts, commissioned a special bottling from Adelphi. And what we've got here, it is a true one-off. It is a really unique bottling just for this one event. It is a 10-year-old Glenrothes, a cask strength 10-year-old Glenrothes. It's been matured entirely in an octave cask, with tiny 1/8 of a sherry butt. So this is a
This is in its own way, in its own way, one of the rarest whiskies in the world.
This is bottle number 82 out of 102.
Yeah.
So it's a 2007 distillation, and 10 years old as of bottling, just for this one event. And I must say, it is possibly one of my favourite whiskies of the year. I was blown away by this. And also, it was actually, comparatively speaking, a true bargain. Produced for this one event, but sold at a very accessible price at the event itself and possibly nowhere else.
Yeah, it's to call this a weird whiskey or an uncommon whiskey would be selling it absolutely short. It is just so strange how this comes about, so unlikely, because the Hororata Highland Games, you could call it New Zealand's premier Scottish sort of cultural event, but in terms of global scale, it is microscopic, absolutely microscopic, and completely insignificant. I guarantee no one will have heard about it that wasn't from maybe even the area, let alone just the country. And yet it gets its own whisky bottling.
Yeah,
Not the first time it's even happened either. So it's a real. We really are spoiled for Scotch whiskies here where we're based in New Zealand.
It's not only a special bottling just for the event, it is a special single cask bottling, the entire cask bottled, so the whole, your average, I think an octave is about maybe 100 litres.
It's not a hell of a lot, no, it's pretty small.
It's, 102 bottles at 700 mils per bottle.
Yeah.
And a blistering 57.5% ABV. So the octave cask gives you quite rapid maturation, I believe, because of the sheer surface area to
Depends how well it's been used, but regardless, will give you... Regardless of how active the wood is, it'll be that much faster than a larger one.
I'm really looking forward to your impressions on this one too, because I was at the Highland Games, I tried this here, bought it on the spot, but you haven't encountered it yet, so we're good to see how you like it.
And independent Glenrothes too. That's something to see as well. That does not show up particularly often.
Plus Adelphi and their knack for picking often the best of the best when it comes to individual casks.
So we will see. What's in here. It's been a weirdly big week for Glenrothes. I was recently able to. We tried that Halloween whiskey, which I came away with, but was able to taste their full revamped, re-released range when they, as I said in that video, finally rationalised all of their bottling, so that they now have a 10, a 12, an 18, a 21, and so on, which is a much more rational way to bottle whiskey, in my opinion. So I was able to taste that full range, and it's really, really good. It's still very, very typically Glenrothes, which is and this one is no exception, a very sherry matured, driven style. So we will see what this one is bringing.
Just as an aside, I want to comment on the labelling too. It seems Adelphi are taking things to another level. They've always been quite minimal in what they tell you on the label, no exception here, but the level of artistry and background detail is a step up from what Adelphi have traditionally gone for. Either that's because it's for a particular special event, or else because Adelphi want to increase their have more of a recognisable label ahead of their own whiskey, which is going to be amazing when it does release in years to come. Nonetheless.
Well, out of this I am getting a very, very pleasing nose of sort of almost like butterscotch sauce, caramelly nose with a lot of toasted nuts in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of custardy fruit pudding. There's stewed fruit, Christmas pudding, apricots, cloves. It is a really spicy, fruity pudding concoction.
Yeah, there's a bit of ginger in there as well, and that's pretty by the book from Glenrothes. They have a big sort of spicy, gingery style of whiskey with a lot of. This, I think, even has more butterscotch than I was expecting out of a Glenrothes. They're always kind of a rich whiskey, but this is
There's
even
a
richer.
strong, oily cling on the glass, but it is a very crystal clear hue and kind of a fairly bright amber or a deep gold.
Fairly gentle on the nose as well, considering it's at full
57.5%.
57.5%, so pretty stonking on that one. So, let's see, at full strength.
That is so drinkable. It is warming, it is spicy and hot, but at full strength it is still very drinkable. It is clean.
It's drinkable.
Smooth.
My tongue starts to tap out after about 10 seconds. It kind of escalates slowly but surely, and where it ends up is just slightly overpowering for me. So I will...
dark chocolate, there is a little bit of chili, ginger, cloves, and some nutmeg, and still a lot more stewed fruit underneath. Plums, cherries, all kinds of good stuff. It is a real Christmas pudding, but with more off a dessert tray aside from that too. It's not overwhelmingly sweet, despite all those sweet characters I mentioned, but it's just the right balance, I think. It is a big, clear, consistent flavour profile.
So with water now, that hasn't hugely altered the nose. I was expecting it to make it significantly fruitier, move it in more of a slightly riper, fruitier, space-sidey direction, but it's...
That was my big surprise of this one, was that water softened the heat of it, but didn't fundamentally transform the flavours. Now, often with Speyside whiskey, you add a little more water and you get... It kind of dankens the flavours which are there. You get more of those tinned fruit flavours and metallic qualities we don't particularly like, or at least I don't particularly like. And with this one, it stays the same, only gets more approachable.
It's remaining pretty resolute in terms of its profile there. It's a little fresher, a little fruitier, a little more... The spirit is a little keener and fresher than it was, but like you say, not really moving a great distance, at least not on the nose.
It has brought out, for me on the tongue, more sweetness. There is honey dripping off it, kind of like a slightly sharp bush honey. You have a sort of the darker, less homogenized honey you can get if you shop around a bit. Not the creamed clover we're used to. But still plenty of those other spices and fruits.
That makes it much more dissectable on the palate anyway. I think there's just a tiny hint in there of young spirit to me. There's a little bit of sort of spiritus fire that's largely sequestered to the very back of the palate for me, and I think some of it's hanging over from when I took the sip of the full strength.
What it's reminding me a little of, in some ways, is the various Indian whiskey we've tried, where you get a lot of maturation in a relatively short space of time, so maximum flavour with still a lot of youthful spirit characters. Obviously, being a Highland whiskey, it's matured slower, but 10 years in a very small and thus fairly active cask, I think, has led it to it maturing in certain ways quickly while still retaining that youthful vigour.
It's brought quite a lot of wood to the profile. I think the spirit hasn't quite kept up with the sort of the impartment of flavour that their wood has brought. That's lagging maybe a couple of years behind for me in terms of where the maturity rests. I guess I could describe it as it's a... Not to say that it's not a good whiskey, it's tremendous belting whiskey here, but it's a 10-year-old whiskey which I think, for me, really, really wants to be a 12-year-old whiskey. I can't help but to wonder whether a couple more years could have improved it even more. But that's not to say that it's in any way bad. It's just a bit sort of... It's rough and ready in a way that Glenrothes normally isn't. They normally bottle older whiskey. So to see 10-year-old... Though they do a cask strength, or at least a barrel strength, a batched cask strength version of their 10-year-old. And it's very, very good from the standard range. But they, I suspect, top dress that one quite heavily, whereas this being a single cask, what you see is exactly what you get. This has not been tweaked or modified at all, so it's all 10-year-old whiskey exactly. So it doesn't have that crutch to lean on. So it's a side of Glenrothes that I think you don't normally get to see. It's a more sort of dynamic, youthful side of a distillery that doesn't tend to bottle that sort of more youthful style of whiskey, for whatever reason. So, give me your score and your reasoning first. Because you've had more time to mull this one over than I have.
This one is a singular and really quite eye-opening expression, I think. The combination of the age of whiskey and the unique type of, well, not unique, but the fairly uncommon cask that's been used means it is approachable on every level at its full strength, straight out of the bottle, in the glass with plenty of water, and yeah, it delivers everything you expect from Speyside, a lot of Highland characters too, but for me, it has none of the weak sides of those characters. It doesn't have none of the weaknesses. There is a full array of milk and dark chocolate, there are sweet fruits, drier fruits, puddings, spices, but it's not a jumbled mess of flavours. It's kind of like a well laid out dessert trolley for someone who doesn't want things too sweet, doesn't want things too dry, and it is indulgent, it is engaging, it is sort of seductive, makes you want to come back for more, and yeah, adding water does not diminish the experience. It is kind of it's a one-off, and it's one of the best I've tried lately, and for me, it rates 93.
There you go. That's conceivably our highest score of the year. We need to go and look back, but it sounds right to me, and we're coming up on the end of year too, so that's coming in right as the finish line comes into focus. For me, it will be an 87. It's a whiskey it seems to me it's like it's on the cusp of something. I think it's a whiskey that's probably, as I say, was it to age another 2 years, it could that score might go up monumentally. I think there's just like I say, I think the wood maturation and the spirit maturation just not quite wheel to wheel racing there, as you could put it. I think the spirit is just slightly behind the queue when it comes to its mature characters versus the wood mature characters, but still a really, really strong whiskey, and one you just, for so many reasons, you never see. You never see, well, practically never see independently bottled Glenrothes. Very, very rare. You never see octaves anymore. There's just barely any of those left in the world, and it's just such an oddity, just how it came to be. The sheer unlikely nature of this whiskey is, I think, magical. It shows shows both how far whiskey reaches in the world and just how close to whiskey some places are in the world while being very, very far away in terms of distance. And or shows how lucky we are as well to be exactly where we are, that completely bizarre bottles fall on us like this. We're very, very lucky. If we were this far out from Scotland, otherwise in the world, maybe we would be completely different. We'd be really, really scraping to find interesting stuff like this. But lucky for you, we get the good stuff.
As a complete aside, this was just an added bonus. It cost about the same as your average 12 to 15-year-old single malt from the core range of your, the usual suspects, usual distillers. It was a, roughly speaking, absolute bargain. Yeah,
good buying at the Hororata Highland Games.
Yes.
We may endeavour to, both go, I'll turn up as well, and maybe take a bit of footage. Get Dave behind the caber, do something like that. That sounds like good fun to me, and we can do a wee check-in with the whiskey scene there as Whiskey Galore does their damnedest to turn it into a full-blown whiskey festival.
As well they should.
I support that fully. Anyway, rambling now, so Slanger, we'll be right back with something a wee bit different. We'll see you then.